Welcome and thank you for registering and thank you for logging in on time to start our afternoon where we're going to be talking about the things that business leaders miss out on when developing strategy. Our webinar this afternoon is going to be recorded and we shall email the link to you within 48 hours of the webinar. Accompanying the link with the recording, it will be a PDF copy of the webinar, which you can keep and refer to. We'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar. And what I'd like to ask you to do is to please use the question and answer box that is located on your menu. On my screen, it's highlighted in green. And what we'll do is at the end of the webinar, I'll take a look at the questions that are there. And based on the time that we have available, I'll try and answer as many questions as possible. So this webinar has been scheduled to help you think through the things that you may have missed out in developing a strategy for 2023 and beyond. And as we come towards the end of 2023, I know a lot of organizations, a lot of business leaders and managers have been involved in the strategy planning process as they look towards 2023. And so this webinar has been developed for people who are involved in developing strategy, who lead strategy, who execute strategy. You could be a business owner, you could be a business leader. And in whichever way that you're involved, there are things that you can learn and just pick up. And I hope that you'll be able to pick up from this webinar and just apply as you move forward. So my name is Angela Wainaina. I am the founder and managing director of Coach Consult Limited, based in Nairobi. I am also a senior associate with the Balanced Scorecard Institute that is based in Washington, DC. And I am one of their Africa partners. My years of experience have been in consulting for different organizations. I have worked in the consulting industry as far back as I can think, actually since I left college. And one of the things that I have gained my experience through is working with different organizations, mainly consulting organizations. So I started my career with Deloitte and then worked with them for about 15 years. Then worked with Chemonics International and also with Balanced Scorecard Eastern Africa as a consulting partner before starting Coach Consult 4 years ago. So my experience in consulting and in strategy has taken me to different countries in Africa, mainly in countries such as Eastern African countries such as Kenya, where I live, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi. I've had an opportunity to work in Ghana, in Southern Africa, in particular in Zambia and Malawi. So some of the things that I'll share this afternoon are really drawn from working with institutions and organizations and leaders who are in those countries and who face common challenges and sometimes miss out on things that are important as they develop strategy. And it's also a time of year where we're developing strategy, and I've been involved in developing strategy for a number of organizations. And as I looked through and the discussions that we've been having, one of the things that I thought is important to share at this time of the year as people meet deadlines and try to close the year is really to remind ourselves, what are some of the things that we might be missing out on that we need to think about as we get into 2023? So today's topics are focusing on a number of areas. One of the things that we're going to be talking about is the challenges that stand in the way of managing strategy. What are some of the obstacles that we face when we're managing strategy, when we're executing that strategy, when we're formulating that strategy? And how can we manage some of these challenges? The other thing that we're going to look at is also, how do you align your team to your strategy so that they can deliver the results that you want to see at the end of the year or at the end of 2 years? What does that alignment look like? And finally, how then, once you have a strategy that is ready, the formulation process has happened, how do you keep your strategy on track so that you keep it on track and you make sure that it works. So just drawing from my experience, this is just a snapshot of a few of the clients that we've worked with to develop strategy, to execute strategy, cascaded down to different levels in the organization, and also measuring the performance of strategy in the business. So let's just start from the top. And one of the things that we always look at when formulating strategy, and sometimes I always ask leaders when they say we'd like a strategy formulated, the first question is what are you thinking about? What is strategy? And strategy is about creating value for your customer. And I always say organizations exist to create value for the customer. And the way that value is created is articulated in the strategy. And the strategy then becomes a roadmap for delivering that value. And so strategy is about moving from what I say is point A to point B. And the reason why we want to move from point A to point B is because at point B, we want to be able to get better results. So really walking through a transformational journey that takes us through from where we are to where we want to be. However, an organization cannot get better if the current level of performance is not stable. So if there's chaos, things are not working in the sense that processes are not working, maybe they're inefficient, they're not documented, people don't understand what they're supposed to be doing, it becomes very, very difficult to formulate strategy without that stability. So something to keep in mind that we always observe and perhaps encourage is that to get better results, let us stabilize the current performance. And then as we formulate our strategy, then we have a basis or a foundation from which we're working. And so here when we're looking at what is strategy, we're looking at it from the point of, I may be a business owner who doesn't have a strategic plan and is starting one or has just started formulating one, or I may be a business leader who is responsible for delivering strategy for the organization. I may be a CEO, I may be an MD, I may report to a board, and I may have a management team or an exco team that is involved in the delivery of strategy for the organization. So just taking a look back, just to remind ourselves, when we're looking at strategy, what is it about? It's simply about what we do, how we position ourselves in the market, and how we deliver value to be able to stay ahead of the competition or stay ahead in our market or be unique in our market. And so a good strategy really presents that logic in terms of saying, this is what we do, this is the type of business we're in, these are the products and services that we offer, and this is what makes us competitive. And so to be complete, there are just a few things a strategy must include. This is not a comprehensive list, but basics include: what business are we in? What products and services are we offering? Who is our customer? Who are we targeting? And where are they? Yeah. And also, do we have the competencies to be able to deliver on our strategy? And so a lot of the organizations that we've worked with, and I've worked with organizations, as I mentioned, in different countries, but I'll focus on organizations that are in private sector. And I think some of the lessons apply also to organizations that are in institutions that are in the public sector, and companies and organizations that are in the not-for-profit sector. But when we start planning, one of the questions that we always ask is, why do we need a strategy? We need a strategy to be able to move from a point of where we are to a point of victory. And the question is, what will victory look like? What will success look like for you when you've achieved that strategy? And so when embarking on a strategy development process, there are certain questions that are important to ask. If you're coming from a position where you're leading a strategy session, or you're a CEO or an MD or a senior manager, and you're involved in the process, there are some questions that need to be asked at the beginning of the process that will guide the development of the formulation of that strategy. And now some of these questions are very, what I consider clear, basic, and simple questions. Where are we as a business or as an organization? And what dilemmas or what struggles are we facing at the moment? Yeah, so really taking stock of where we are at the moment. And then the second question is about where do we want to be? Where do we want to go? And what will success look like for us when we get there? Linked to that is, what do we want to achieve? So what sort of results do we want to achieve? Specific results that we can measure and will tell us that we've gotten there. Another element that is important when we are embarking on our strategy journey is to determine what needs to change. Because remember, I mentioned strategy is about moving from point A to B. To move from point A to B, there needs to be some sort of change. And that change should be transformational. It should not be business as usual. And so one question that is important to ask as we embark on our strategy development process is, what is it that needs to change? That could be amongst our people, it could be amongst our processes, it could be related to our infrastructure, but let's just determine what needs to change. Let's answer that question. And then, having determined what needs to change, asking the question, what are we good at? What areas do we excel in? And within what context are we able to do these things? And when we're looking at context, it's acknowledging our internal context and also acknowledging our external context, the environment in which we operate. And finally, a question that is key to ask is, how do we achieve our objectives? So how are we going to achieve the objectives that we're setting out for ourselves? So some key questions that we need to sort of have on that flip chart or on that whiteboard that will guide us through our discussions, either through a strategy session, a brainstorming session, it could be an internal session, it could be a facilitated session. So whatever the context of the planning, these are questions to have on hand that will guide the thinking through the planning process. And so as you start to think about 2023, if you have already formulated your strategy, is your strategy answering some of these questions or all of these questions? If you're in the process of finalizing your strategy, you can do a quick check to just check, are we answering these questions? Are they clear? One of the things that I've seen and we've experienced when working with organizations, and this is a statistic that is drawn from the Economist Intelligence Unit, and it says 61% of firms struggle to bridge the gap between formulating strategy and its day-to-day execution. And I can tell you, a lot of organizations and companies are very good at formulating strategy. The planning process, the documentation process is very well thought through and is well documented. But then many times we do experience situations where a client will come and say, we have a good strategy, but we are stuck. We're not sure how to execute it. How do we move forward, right? And the implementation is what is critical to delivering results. And sometimes that is what we miss out on, thinking about how are we going to get across to the execution phase now that we have a good strategic plan. And so let's look at some of the common challenges that teams, executive teams, management teams face and organizations in general face in executing strategy and also managing strategy. And one of the things that I've seen has been getting everyone to buy into the strategy and own it. And a lot of the times, significant amount of time is spent developing strategy, resources are allocated to developing it. But then you find that the ownership is owned by a few people, mainly those who have been involved in its formulation and those at the top. The second challenge that we've seen is, once the strategy has been created, is creating that alignment so that everyone or every employee in the organization understands how that strategy affects them and how they contribute to that strategy. So one of the challenges that we see is the alignment is not clear. People are not aligned. People are not moving in the same direction. Everyone is trying to get their goals delivered, their objectives done, but we're not moving in the same direction. The next common challenge that we see is related to the creation of value. And as I said earlier, organizations exist to create value for the customer. And if there is a lack of understanding of how that value is created, then the execution of the strategy becomes very difficult, because people or employees may not understand fully who is this product or service being created for, how does it deliver value, and who does it deliver value for. Another challenge is the inability to prioritize and fund what we call strategic initiatives. So in every strategy, and many of you sure have been involved in strategic planning or have been involved in initiatives that have been set out to deliver on strategy. And one of the challenges that we see is that initiatives are not prioritized, or we have a list of initiatives. We are not clear how these initiatives will be funded, and we have so many initiatives that we don't deliver on all of the initiatives, or there's no criteria to determine which initiative is high impact, which initiative will transform the business, which initiative will really help deliver this strategy. And so that inability to prioritize is a common challenge. I remember working with a bank a couple of years ago, and we went in to see their CEO and their CFO. And one of the discussions on the table was, how do we manage our strategic initiatives? And we asked, so how many strategic initiatives do you have? And they said, oh, we have about 30 to deliver in the year, because the board expects us to deliver X number of initiatives in the year. And so what was happening was that they were struggling to figure out which initiatives have been completed, which ones are underway, which ones are high impact. So the prioritization of strategic initiatives is critical and is often an execution challenge. The other challenge that we see is tracking and collecting of feedback on the performance of strategy. So as execution takes place, as strategy is rolled out, how do we collect feedback on how we're progressing on the strategy? How do we track performance? Yeah, so that the strategy is not completed and then put aside, and then we wait until the end of Q1 to be able to review the strategy, or wait until the end of the year to determine what we accomplished. How do we continuously track and collect feedback on how we're doing? So that is a challenge that many organizations face. And the other area that is important is also, as we track and feedback on performance, one of the struggles that we've seen organizations facing is being able to take the lessons that we're learning from the implementation of the strategy and embed them in the way we do things, so that then we're saying, we are not able to perform in this area on our strategy because of a certain issue. What is the issue? The issue could be related to processes, it could be related to people, but how do we incorporate that in our day-to-day, in our behavior, in our culture? Another common challenge that we see is the use of KPIs or performance measures that are not the right performance measures. And we'll look at that in a minute, just in terms of when we're looking at KPIs, why is it important that the KPI is clear? And an execution challenge, and I'm sure many of us have experienced this, is where KPIs or performance measures are handed down or are given to us to deliver on, and we don't understand what that KPI is about. And finally, a common challenge is related to really understanding, how does this strategy affect our day-to-day operations? So I mentioned earlier that strategy is about moving from point A to B, which is a change process, but also it affects the way we do things on a day-to-day. So how does strategy affect our operations? Just really understanding that connection is sometimes lacking and becomes a challenge in the day-to-day execution, because people continue to work in terms of its business as usual, but really our operations should be changing and transforming and transitioning to be better so that we are able to deliver on that strategy. So our topic for this webinar is really, as I mentioned at the beginning, is really to look at what are some of the things that we might be missing out on as we develop strategy, or as we go through the strategic planning process as individuals, in our teams, in our businesses. And one of the things that we see is really missing out on being able to spend time on a couple of strategic questions. And these, sometimes business leaders are very involved in the day-to-day and forget to step back and just address these strategic important questions. And what are they? Spending time in terms of thinking about, why do we exist? What is our purpose? And this is usually captured in our mission. And is that mission clear? What do we do well? And what are we good at as a business and as an organization? Spending time thinking about the products and services that we offer. Are they creating value for the customers that we serve? Are they innovative products? How are they delivering value? And to which customers are we delivering value to? So really spending time and thinking through these questions and checking whether we are answering some of these questions through our strategy. The other area or question that is important and strategic to think about is the products and services that we are delivering and offering to our customer or offering into the market. What do they produce for the business? How do they address the expectations of our shareholders? And how do we measure the way the organization is being judged, not just by shareholders, but also by stakeholders who are interested in the way we do business, and also our employees, because they are the ones who deliver on strategy. The other area where we need to spend time on is related to, how will people receive this strategy, and people within the organization, our employees, our stakeholders, and our customers. There are organizations where we've worked and seen the strategy is articulated internally to stakeholders and also to customers, depending on the type of strategy, on the type of organization that it is. So I'll just give some examples. If you have time after this session, just go to the GSK GlaxoSmithKline website, the Daimler website, the Nike website. These are websites where the strategy is actually articulated quite clearly, and there are aspects that can be seen by those of us who are on the outside as customers or as stakeholders to really just understand. So really just thinking through, how will people within and external to the organization think or say or feel about our strategy? And finally, the last question is about, do we have the capabilities to be able to deliver on this strategy? And what do I mean by capabilities? Capabilities could be people resources, it could be technology, it could be infrastructure, it could be any resource that we need to to build on or to have in the organization to help us deliver the strategy. So some of the things that we need to be thinking about that we sometimes miss out on that are critical as we're developing our strategies for years to come. The second area is about translation. The formulation takes time, it addresses certain questions, and when the strategy is ready, and I can share that there are organizations and companies that we've worked with that have very, very good strategies. And however, when we go in and try to understand where have you reached in terms of execution, we find that the translation of that strategy has sort of stopped. Things are stuck. Why? One is the communication. Coming up with strategy is a process. It's a process that's involving, and we come up with very good strategies that are documented. When it comes to translating that strategy so that everybody in the organization understands it, that is where we, as business leaders, sometimes miss out on a few things. And one of the things is, how do we communicating that strategy using very clear, simple language that everyone understands and interprets in the same way? And what do I mean by that? I always say strategy should be as clear and as understandable enough for a 10-year-old to understand. So that when the words that we use in the strategy, the language we use should be very simple and clear, because if you think about it, it's transcending down to the lower levels of people working in the organization. And so that clarity in terms of what the strategy is about is important in terms of how it's communicated. We've seen communication of strategy through town halls, through emails, which is very interesting, through management meetings, so different forms. But I think at the end of the day, what is important is to determine what is our communication plan for this strategy. Once the strategy is ready, or even before the strategy is ready, starting to think through, how are we going to communicate this strategy? When are we going to communicate it? Yeah. How do we keep the channels open for communication so that people can understand what we're trying to achieve and the results that we want them to deliver? The second area that business leaders sometimes miss out on is connecting that strategy to the budgeting process. And this is a time, December, November, is a time when we're trying to finalize our budgets for next year, for 2023. The strategy is being finalized. Budgets are being finalized. They need to be approved by the board. And sometimes we're not working hand in hand to really understand the strategy and the initiatives in the strategy. Have they been captured in the budgets? And if they haven't, how do we make sure that our key strategic priority initiatives are costed for in our budgets? And so it's important to just check whether the transformational things that we want to do in our plan for next year have been captured in our budget. And if they haven't, what then might we need to change? The other areas in terms of translating strategy is really building the right capabilities so that as we trickle down, taking cognizance of what we need to work on in terms of our people, in terms of our processes, in terms of our technology, to be able to build the capabilities that exist to be able to deliver on the strategy and deliver the results that we want to see. So a couple of things that we sometimes miss out on as business leaders in the translation of strategy that we need to keep in mind and check as we are finalizing or as we're formulating the strategies that we have. The third area is the execution. And I mentioned the gap between formulation and execution. And for execution to happen, if you have a strategy currently, You may have started thinking through its execution. You may be thinking through the roadmap for execution. You may not have started thinking about execution. And it's important to think about execution very early, because for execution to happen, it's important for us to check, is this strategy clear and specific enough to allow for execution? And as I mentioned, the challenges that majority of organizations have is in the execution and implementation of strategy. And so as we think through execution, creating alignment of the strategy is a critical area that is sometimes overlooked. And it really comes down to our staff and our employees. Have they bought into the strategy? Do they understand what's in it for them? You see, a lot of the times when we're developing strategy, one of the things that I hear, and is always a discussion in our strategic planning meetings, is that we want to motivate staff. Yeah, we want to have staff who are happy, who are delivering on results. But for staff and employees to do that, they need to understand what's in it for them. They need to understand how what they do connects to the delivery of, connects to that strategy that has been formulated at this level. And so that understanding is what helps to create the alignment. The understanding is one thing, but the second thing is to understand it needs to have been trickled down so that it aligns to what each individual member in a team is required to achieve or accomplish. And we'll look at, I'll be taking you through how that alignment can be created. The other area that I felt, there are many areas that one looks at when executing, but something that we sometimes miss on, or is existent and we perhaps choose not to address it, is really breaking silos that exist within the company or within the organization. And being able to, as a business leader, being able to make sure that people within departments are working together so as to be able to overcome challenges and be able to deliver on that strategy is something that we sometimes miss out on. And it's simple things, or maybe not so simple, but it could be things that, for instance, we were working with a company the other day, and one of the things that came out is that we work in silos. So we're trying to develop a strategy. We work in silos, and people don't understand how they support each other in terms of delivering results. So breaking silos is critical as we develop strategy. And one of the ways that we can do that is really by helping each other understand. If I sit in finance, if I sit in HR, if I sit in IT, I am a support department. However, I have a contribution to the overall strategy. I also have a contribution to how another department may be performing. It could be a sales department, it could be a marketing department, it could be a logistics department, but the synergies do exist. And unless those synergies are recognized and are understood, then the effect of the silos tends to hamper the delivery of the strategy. So as business leaders, it's important for us to not miss out on that issue if it exists, and actually see how to handle it. The other thing that we sometimes miss out on is thinking through how are we keeping track of the way our strategy is being delivered, and really being able to have a clear monitoring framework to be able to track it could be bi-weekly, it could be monthly, in terms of how we're doing on performance. And we look at how to have the conversations that allow you to track performance so that you're not waiting until perhaps the end of the quarter, as I said earlier, to understand where things are, but be able to track it progressively through over time. Following on to just translating strategy, I talked about the communication. And one of the tools that we use in helping organizations to translate strategy is the Balanced Scorecard tool. And I mentioned I'm an associate of the Balanced Scorecard. I am certified in training on the Balanced Scorecard, and I'm a Balanced Scorecard master professional. And one of the tools that helps to translate strategy into action is the Balanced Scorecard tool. And what I'd just like to take some time to share with you here is that as leaders, as we are executing strategy, the translating that strategy into action requires clarity of our objectives. So in our strategy, we'll have our mission, we'll have our vision, we'll have our values, we'll have our strategic focus areas or our strategic themes, and then we will have then the objectives that will help us deliver on those strategic focus areas. And it's important when we're translating strategy that has been formulated to really define, what does a specific objective mean? What is this objective about? So for instance, in this example here, one of the objectives in this organization was to increase efficiency and reliability of services. They are very clear in terms of the description of what does that objective mean and what does it focus on. And in this case, it focuses on improving processes. It's a company in the energy industry, and it's about improving processes for efficient energy generation, utility service, reliability, and customer-facing services. With that description, there's a very clear outcome. If we pursue this objective, what will we see? What will success look like for this objective? And so the desired end outcome is important to clarify as the objective is being translated. Again, to translate that strategy into action is to then look at, for each objective that we are pursuing in our strategy, do we have key performance measures or key performance indicators that are clear and that tell us how we will measure this objective, and that tell us if we're getting closer and closer to meeting what it is that we intend to do to get out of this objective. And so performance measures are a way, again, of making sure that strategy is translated to a point where we understand how we're going to measure. The targets are also critical in terms of saying, for this objective, what are our targets for this particular objective? If it is an annual target, then we set out the annual target. In this case, this business set out specific targets for the year that can be tracked and can be monitored. And one of the targets, and you notice the targets are quantifiable. So for instance, less than or equal to 2 days. So one is able to collect data to be able to confirm whether that KPI, that target is being met through the KPI. And then finally, in translating strategy into action is being very clear on the initiatives that are being pursued. So for each objective, do we have an initiative that we can translate and trickle down to lower levels so that then there is ownership of the initiatives and people understand what that initiative is trying to deliver? So critical things that we need to think through as we're executing. Does our strategy contain all of these things? Is it clear in communicating all of these areas for each of the objectives that we're pursuing? As we think through execution, the critical area that business leaders I've observed sometimes either don't know how to do or may overlook is thinking through, how do we trickle it down to lower levels in the organization? And that trickling down is really cascading that strategy to departments or functions that may be customer facing, departments or functions that may be support functions, so that then they align to the main strategy. So just to give you an illustration here, typically when developing strategy, we start by developing strategy at the corporate level. And this is where we either define, we refresh, or we refine our current mission, our values, our vision, our strategic themes or focus areas. And we also determine the objectives that will help us deliver the picture of success that we have created. For that, for the execution to happen, it's important that the strategy that has been developed at this level is trickled down to the second level, which is the level at which departments, divisions, or functions sit. And it's important for this level, which is what we call in balanced scorecard terms, tier 2, the level where heads of departments need to understand how they contribute to the overall strategy. As heads of departments and as departmental teams or divisional teams or functional teams. And as we think through execution, it is also looking at the third level, which is the individuals that sit in those teams. Do those individuals understand how they contribute to their departments or to what their departments are trying to achieve, and how that eventually links to delivering the results at the top? And so at what we call tier 3 or individual level, this is the level where employees have job descriptions. Employees have KPIs. They have individual objectives. They have individual performance measures of KPIs, as I've mentioned, and they have individual initiatives. Now, I think one of the things that is important for us not to miss out on is being able to communicate at this level that the strategy is about helping us move forward. So whatever we do at our individual levels in the organization should be transformational. Whatever initiatives we are pursuing should not be our business as usual. There is what we come to work to do that is in our job descriptions that we need to deliver in our roles, but the strategy comes or is developed so that we can take the organization to the next level. And so for that to happen, there are some things that need to be done differently. Yeah, so I need to stretch myself. And how do I stretch myself? I need to identify the initiatives that align to where we are trying to go as a business, in addition to the day-to-day work that I do, that will help me contribute to the overall success of the company strategy. So when we're thinking through execution as business leaders, it's important to think through this process right from the top. How are we trickling down the strategy so that we create the alignment, and therefore then from the bottom, from the lower levels or individual levels, then we're able to contribute, and therefore the performance then begins to happen at the top. So sometimes we find we go into organizations and the leadership team will say, you know what, we're doing very well. We're not doing very well. We're in the red or we're in the orange. But at individual level, individuals seem to be achieving all their goals, and there seems to be a disconnect. But that disconnect occurs a lot of the times because the alignment is missing. So as leaders, and as you're thinking through about your execution of your strategy for 2023, think through, how are we going to create the alignment? What are some of the things that we may be missing out on? Or what are some of the challenges we're having in the creation of alignment to deliver performance that we need to be addressing? So a few tips to keep your strategy moving in 2023. And I think the first, and I'll call it a rule, because I think rules, we tend to be better at following rules, sometimes more than tips. So perhaps a rule. The first rule is really narrowing your focus. Think about focusing on a few things. What are the few objectives or goals that you're going to pursue in 2023? Remember, the more goals you have or the more objectives you have, I sometimes say, the less you're likely to achieve. But when we're looking at what we're focusing on, is looking at what impact will these things have on our strategy and the outcomes that we want to see in the future. The second rule that is important in keeping your strategy moving for 2023 is to assign owners to objectives. We create objectives at the strategic planning level, and objectives are part and parcel of our strategy. When it comes to execution, there is always and sometimes the question, who is going to deliver what? And it's important to think through at the beginning, these objectives that we've come up with, who is the real owner? The owner, meaning the owner of that objective, the person who will report on how that objective and the initiatives within that objective are being delivered. And the owner will work with a team to be able to deliver on the objective, so that when you come back to reporting on performance, you're able to report on all of your objectives because the owners understand what they were required to deliver on, and they're able to sort of bring up, up to date positions in terms of where things are. But it's not just about being up to date. It's also about, if we're not achieving an objective, is there room for intervention? What's not working? What do we need to do? What resources or help needs to come along, so for us to be able to deliver on this objective and really arrest that early. The third rule, and I think this is an important rule for us to note down, is to try and keep your strategy meetings separate from your operational meetings. And this is to help us continue having the strategic thinking, or wearing the strategic thinking hat throughout the year. And it could be as simple as in a management meeting or in an exco meeting, have an agenda for strategy and an agenda for the operational aspects of the business, because sometimes the two become intertwined. And as I'm sure you have seen, a lot of the times we spend a lot of time on operational matters and forget what we set out to do. What was the strategic thinking? What was the direction we were taking? So really keep those strategy meetings scheduled, but also in the meetings, have a very clear agenda in terms of what is strategic and what is operational. The fourth rule and the final rule is related to monitoring the strategy. When we've worked with some organizations, we've seen organizations set up a strategy management office, or they have a strategy manager or a strategy officer who is responsible for just making sure that the initiatives and the objectives and the initiatives that were to be rolled out are being rolled out, and people are reporting back on where things are. Typically, this should not be, the monitoring and reporting role should not be the role of the CEO or the MD. There really should be somebody who is assigned to keep track of that performance and really pull together the information that is being shared related to where things are in terms of the strategy, and bringing that to a strategy review meeting, or even just to the regular reporting sessions that the teams will have. Now, that is at a corporate level, but I always say when we're having our departmental meetings, because a lot of us may have, and where we don't have, it's important to put in place a departmental strategy that aligns to the corporate strategy, so that in that departmental meeting, we're also looking at what did we say we're trying to achieve as a department, and where are we now? And then separately handle the operational issues that we need to handle as part of our business as usual. So 4 rules that we need to keep in mind as we track and move our strategy into 2023. And these are rules that can be shared with team members, so that people understand where you're coming from when we're saying, let's keep strategic conversations and operational conversations separate. So this is a snapshot of the services that we offer. As I mentioned, we've worked with different companies, but mainly focusing on strategy consulting, helping through the formulation and implementation of strategy, and cascading it down and helping organizations and individuals develop KPIs to track strategy and measure strategy. One of the training areas that we offer is the Balanced Scorecard certification training. And as I mentioned, I'm a certified Balanced Scorecard trainer. And we also offer training on developing KPIs, key performance indicators. I'm an executive coach, and I enjoy working with business leaders to really just help transition really from points of potential to points of performance. And this could be through, helping you develop your strategy, helping you lead teams, and just different areas that the coaching can serve. But typically, and related to strategy, is as you're thinking about 2023, it's looking at, is your strategic plan balanced, and will it deliver the results that you want? Do you have a scorecard that will help you track how you're implementing your strategy? How will you measure whether or not your strategy is working? And also, how are you aligning your day-to-day work or the day-to-day work of your teams with the strategy that has been set out? And so we help you just address some of these areas, walk you through the journey of getting there, so that you can have either annually or every 3 years, in some cases 5 years, a plan that addresses balance, that addresses good measurement, and that addresses alignment. So I'll stop here and just take a look at the questions. I think we have a few. There's a question here. It says on my slide, and thank you for pointing that out. It says there's a 5th rule that we may have missed out, and Terry says she's managed to get 4 rules. Let me just go back to that slide and see what we have. So the 5th rule is really related to communicate, communicate, communicate. Don't stop communicating what's in your strategy. And I say communication is critical because the minute you stop communicating, the interpretation of your strategy starts to get lost. And so the communication could be informally, it could be formally through meetings, it could be conversations with stakeholders, it could be conversations with your shareholders. But just communicate where you are, how things are, where you're having challenges, because that's what keeps the strategy alive. We have a few minutes for questions, just about 5 minutes, and then we will be able to close. Yes, we will share the presentation. You will receive an email with the replay of the webinar, and in that email, you will receive a PDF document with a presentation. So I'd like to thank you all for logging in, for staying in and listening through this webinar. As you begin your 2023, I want to wish you all the best in your planning process. If you have finished your planning process, I wish you all the best in the execution. And I always say the execution is where the hard work comes in. There's a question in the chat: what is a balanced scorecard? So Rose, a balanced scorecard is essentially a framework. It's a tool that you can use to develop strategy so that you ensure, it helps you ensure that you can address all the areas in the organization that contribute to the strategy. So address people, processes, address your customers, and also address your shareholders who are interested in the financials. So the scorecard gives it, the balance scorecard is the balance across the 3, so that you're looking at the organization or the company in its entirety, and making sure that it's balanced, because what has tended to happen sometimes when people don't use a balanced scorecard framework is we focus a lot on the financials, and we don't pay enough attention to who delivers the financials. It's the people. How do they deliver? Through processes. Who do these processes serve? They serve the customer. And it is when the customer purchases our products and services that then we are able to achieve our revenues, our profits, and the results that we want to see. Okay, see if there are any other questions. If you'd like to get some more information on just talking to me or to us about how to align your strategy, how to develop a balanced strategy, how to communicate your strategy, please feel free to visit the website, angelawainaina.com, and there you'll be able to schedule a discovery call with me, and we can have a one-on-one. So I think I don't see any more questions. I'd just like to take this opportunity to wish you a Merry Christmas.